Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's Wolf NYC, WOLFNYC.com.
Hello, my name is Andy Edstrom, and I'm happy to welcome you to the 6th episode of Scarce Assets, the show that examines scarcity, the most fundamental driver of economics and markets, and the scarcest asset of all, which is Bitcoin. Happy to be here with my great friend and co-host Jesse Myers and our guest, the great Robert Breedlove. Now, I'm going to say a few things about Robert. I met Robert for the first time at the Bitcoin 2019 conference, which I almost can't believe was 5 years ago now. And we had a great conversation. I was immediately impressed by him. And that was at a point when he was really just starting to hit his stride. He had recently published Money, Bitcoin, and Time. And in the subsequent few years, he published several articles that are now must-read pieces for understanding Bitcoin, including both Bitcoin and the number 0 and Masters and Slaves of Money. But he then took his scholarship to the next level when he launched the What is Money Show, and it's on my personal very short list of must-listen podcasts. Now, Robert has produced fantastic collaborations with a lot of brilliant people, including Jordan Peterson and Michael Saylor, and I'm sure I'm missing some of his other great accomplishments, but I also must say that Robert has always been kind to me, and I couldn't be happier to have him on the show. So, Robert, how are you today?
I am great, Andy. Thank you for that very nice introduction. Although, if my brain is not mistaken, I think we may have met before the 2019 conference.
Did we really? I remember we had lunch at one point in Santa Monica.
Yeah, we had lunch in Santa Monica. When was that, though? Wasn't that 2018, maybe?
You might be right about that. In my mind, the first intro was at the conference, but I may have those reversed. It would not surprise me.
Yeah, how far things have come in such a short period of time.
A lot of water under the bridge, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those topics today.
I want to piggyback, Andy, on number 0 in Bitcoin. Robert, for me, was actually probably the final nail in the coffin for me on like the altcoin possibility. And so like that was the last piece of the puzzle that I didn't have like a solid answer for, and that took care of it. And from there, it's just been, Bitcoin maxi for me. So I appreciate you for that.
I love to hear that, because that was the point of the piece, as you know, the opening line. And it's a hard part of Bitcoin to understand, right? The social layer, that it's not just a technology, there's a social institution aspect to it. And it sounds ridiculous almost. You're like, what do you mean you can just copy and paste Bitcoin, but there's only 21 million? So you could just copy and paste it forever. So to explain that is pretty tricky, and you have to invoke a lot of kind of esoteric ideas like path dependence and network effects and blah, blah, blah. So I'm really happy to hear it had that impact on you, because I was, really struggling to find a good historical analogy, and I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, it's perfect for it. And for anyone who hasn't read it, what the hell are you doing? Go read that.
That's it. I've actually sent clients to it, because that's one of the hardest questions that I've had, attempted to have to deal with, is if you can just copy it, why can't there be, what's the difference between Bitcoin and, I don't know, Litecoin or something on that logic? And so I've leaned on your piece. It's saved me, I think, a little bit of time, and you certainly articulated it more clearly, than I ever could have. So we both gotten some good mileage out of that piece.
That's great to hear. Definitely the fan favorite, I think, of all the feedback I've received, is that one's the favorite.
Yeah, I love it. Well, let's talk about, some of your more recent work now. I want to talk about some of the more timeless themes that interest you and that you've explored on the What is Money show. This, your work touches numerous different disciplines, how they intersect money, society, economics, philosophy, a lot of different areas. I'm curious, are there any fields of study that you found surprisingly interesting in their intersection with money?
Ooh, that's a good question. A lot of people, so when people first hear the title of the podcast, the What is Money show, they're like, oh, it's a finance show. I'm like, actually, not really at all. We talk almost nothing about finance. Yep. It's much more philosophical / psychological. I mean, there's obviously some historical stuff, some economic stuff, but I have found myself recently obsessively reading a lot of Western philosophy. Before Bitcoin, I'd read Eastern philosophy. So this is like Sun Tzu, Musashi, some Krishnamurti. I was very into those philosophers. Those are Indian and Asian. But then in conversations, obviously Jordan Peterson was a big inspiration for me, even to start the podcast. Through Jordan Peterson, I discovered the work of the likes of John Vervaeke. He was a colleague of Jordan Peterson's at University of Toronto. Vervaeke's been on the show a couple of times. He has an amazing podcast. Through John Vervaeke, I discovered the author D.C. Schindler, who wrote this book, Plato's Critique of Impure Reason. And it's just so damn good. Like, it's one of those books you read and you're like, I can't believe a human wrote this. But a lot of that philosophy, like, it talks about how things are dramatic in nature. So there's not, we typically use words and think that, the word is the thing, but there's reality is more relational than that. So that's why there's always context, and, you have to read between the lines, and we even need things like language and money, right? Because action is continuous and complex. It's not discrete and simple. And so I guess to sort of answer your question, in D.C. Schindler's books, he writes often. He's writing about the work of Plato, Socrates. Socrates is like the main character of Plato's writing, effectively. Yep. He's kind of like the archetypal philosopher. So he embodies his philosophy. But one of the ideas in a lot of his writing is the idea of a mediating third, that between any two poles, there's always a mediating third between them. And it's kind of complex to unravel, but I just thought that was so fascinating. It's like you get to the bottom of Western philosophy, and you find this notion of like the mediating third, and I can't help but think that of money in that way, right? Like money is structurally similar to that, and that's why I think the show, we end up talking a lot about language, a lot about definitions. Actually, Socrates said the beginning of wisdom is the definition of terms. Ayn Rand said something like definitions are the guardians of rationality, something that protects us against mental disintegration. So very easy to forget this open source software that we're running called language is not the thing itself, not the actions and the phenomenon or the phenomena themselves. But we talk as if they are, but they're not. So we have to remember that, we're always kind of like mapping this territory. So it gets very meta and complex that you're trying to talk about the mapping instrument, whether that be language or whether that be the language of value or human action, which we call money. And so I think for me, that's what's really fascinating. And I think that's what a lot of people in the audience kind of sees onto. It's kind of a cerebral rabbit hole-ish podcast.
Yeah, I love that. It is fascinating and surprising. It certainly was surprising to me that an exploration of what money is can cut so deeply into our understanding of the meaning of the universe, frankly. It really is quite incisive. I certainly wish I'd read more philosophy up to this point, and so I'm gonna make an effort to catch up a little bit with you in that regard. But I highly recommend the John Vervaeke episodes. I listened to both of them. I thought they were tremendous, and
Thank you.
Highly recommend them to watch or to listeners and viewers for sure.
He's one of the best. I love the joke that Jordan Peterson is a gateway drug to John Vervaeke. Like if you think Peterson's good, then you're going to love Vervaeke. And I would argue Vervaeke for me was a gateway drug to DC Schindler. And DC Schindler's been on Vervaeke's show, and I've read 2 of DC Schindler's books. The one I mentioned previously, Plato's Critique of Impure Reason, and then the one I read recently is The Perfection of Freedom. Whew, that's a good book too, man.
Excellent.
If I could speak a little bit about that. So this is a little bit off the deep end, and I might not have a full grasp of this, but it's
Go
fun.
for it.
So you pick up that book, The Perfection of Freedom. I have no idea what I'm getting into. Right? It's a 500-page philosophy book on the nature of freedom. If I may spoil the ending, it's not a fiction book. It's nonfiction philosophy. Towards the end of the book, DC Schindler, I guess, asserts that marriage actually is the ultimate form of human freedom. And now you might think that's quite paradoxical because marriage is, you're giving up your options, right? You're giving up your freedom to commit to one person, one family for life till death do you part. But an argument that he makes there, and again, I'm not going to do this justice. You really got to read the book. It's one of those books I found myself highlighting more than half the book. Like it's that good. His writing is so good. He says marriage enables 2 forms of transcendence. One is a vertical transcendence, where 2 people become one in the sacred union of marriage. So unlike a contract, like a legal contract where you and I enter into it, Andy's on one side, he's the counterparty, Robert's the other counterparty. We enter into a contract. On the other side of that contract, we're still Andy and Robert. But on the other side of the contract of marriage, you're no longer separate beings. You're literally one unit, basically. And it's until death do you part. So he gets into that as like you gain this vertical transcendence where 2 people are basically becoming one. And then it enables horizontal transcendence, which is, well, you get to have kids, right? You have the container for children, and you can be fruitful and multiply, as you might say. So marriage ends up being this like choice that you're giving up one form of choice, but you're gaining this other thing, right? You gain this union with another human, and you gain this container to have children and build a meaningful life and all of that. And so I'm reading this, and I was just thinking how private property and marriage are sort of maybe have a structural similarity, because basically private property is, well, you are wedded, the owner is wedded to their assets in a way, right? Like it's a bond between owner and asset. Now it's not exactly like marriage, because obviously you don't marry your car for life and, reproduce with it or whatever. But one thing, a vertical form of transcendence that private property enables is the pricing system, so that we all kind of merge our minds into one thing, and we can see, the total supply and the total demand for any commodity in the world is just data compressed into this one market price. So you don't need to know anyone's story, anyone's business, anyone's P&L. You just see everything through the market price. And if it goes up and you're a consumer, then you're incentivized to consume less or use substitutes. If you're a producer and the price goes up, then you're incentivized to produce more. So the market price is how we're alleviating scarcity in the world, frankly, which what your guys' show is all about. Mm-hmm. And then so that would be like the vertical form of transcendence that you actually mind meld through the pricing system. And then the horizontal form of transcendence, which is we get the multiplication of capital, right? We get more quantity and quality of consumer goods, capital goods, et cetera. So anyways, bit off the deep end there, but it's those types of things. Like, what in the world? Studying money, you end up reading a book about Western philosophy that tells you marriage is the ultimate form of freedom, and then you're drawing parallels to private property. These are the kinds of explorations that I've been having over the years, and it's a lot of fun.
That's the multidisciplinary approach that I love that you take, Robert. And my wife will be very happy to know, you're so pro marriage and believe that it enhances freedom. Love to hear that. Jesse, more recently bit the bullet and has also been horizontally. I think he's going to horizontally expand, as you put it. Yes. I think that's coming up for him relatively shortly.
Yep, in a couple months. So got that coming down the pike, and very excited about that. And it's very interesting to think about those themes with regard to money and regard to that question of what is money, and how you were pointing out it's about intermediaries too. Mm-hmm. Because in our relationships, in our romantic relationships, we're floating around in a marketplace until we decide to commit mm-hmm. to a single counterparty, as mm-hmm. it were, and turn that into something else, like a life. So you're right. It's so funny that I guess you're kind of at the forefront of this, of like recognizing that explorations of Bitcoin is really an exploration of money, and an exploration of money is an exploration of the world and like human nature and the human experience, because it is ultimately the currency for how we value everything that's important to us.
Bingo.
So you're doing that more than anybody else, which is really awesome.
Well, I mean, yeah, I thank you. I think we're all, it feels like Bitcoin's going to suck everyone into that. It's just, I've been kind of aggressively running at it because I'm already a naturally curious person, and Bitcoin has just been this bottomless rabbit hole to just plunge and plunge and plunge. The other thing that came up for me is
you and Gigi are near the bottom, but neither of you have found it, huh?
Nobody will ever find it, I don't think. Because of what you just said, actually, if money is the language of human action, and this is the title of Mises's famous book, obviously, and human action is basically everything.
Yep.
Literally everything, right? We don't have any perception or observation or experience that's not a human action, because guess what? It's coming through your eyes, ears, nose, like it's all human action in a way. And also humans, every market in the world exists to serve that market. Like, we would not accumulate goods or capital if we were not going to be making a new generation. So I thought about that too, that if you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney.
We want you to join us for 2 days of discussions and debate, which is all happening at the inaugural Dissident Dialogues 2024.
This incredible event will take place in Brooklyn on May the 3rd and 4th. You'll be joining leading thinkers such as Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, John McWhorter, Aisha Akambi, Michael Schellenberger, Mary Harrington, Chris Williamson, Winston Marshall, Konstantin Kisin, Francis Foster, and more.
Hang on a second, since when have you ever been a serious thinker?
I love thinking, it's my favourite hobby. Sometimes, of an evening, it's all I do. Think.
Moving swiftly on, we want you to join us for a gathering where everyone is part of the conversation. Conservatives, progressives, atheists, theists, left, right, and everything in between.
Dissident Dialogues presents a rare opportunity to immerse yourself in a conversation with the most influential thinkers of our time.
We'll tackle important topics relating to religion, science, politics, and culture. If you're driven by intellectual honesty, curiosity, and a desire for the truth, Dissident Dialogues is the place for you.
It's not just an event, it's the beginning of an intellectual journey, and we want you to come along for the ride. I like rides.
Dissident Dialogues is a place for dangerous ideas. Buy your tickets now at dissidentdialogues.org and be part of the conversation.
All these markets, all the trade, the economy and everything, the real point of it is the people that come after us, right? The legacy we leave our children. Because if we didn't reproduce, well, why would we economize? Why would we accumulate capital? Why would we build civilization? Because we'd all be gone in a generation. We just have one big party, right? Call it a day. But we do all of this economization, learning, knowledge transfer for the kids, basically. And I mean, it's somewhat obvious to say that, but it's kind of interesting to think about it through a market perspective.
Amen. It's all for the kids. That's why we're doing the Scarce Assets podcast here. It's all for the kids. I can certainly attest to the fact that learning about Bitcoin has made me think longer term and have a longer time preference. I have to say, with respect to the informational element, and the price mechanism, I always think of some chat that I saw on YouTube, Wences Casares, and he really focused on the measuring stick. I mean, he really focused on the fact that fiat money is this measuring stick that's been shifting and moving on us. And I was really not prepared to comprehend at the time, that was maybe the most important element of it. But it certainly has weighed heavier on my mind, and I'm always brought back to that moment in time. When I was exposed to the thing, wasn't quite ready for it, which of course is true about Bitcoin generally for people, and how and when they fall down the rabbit hole. But we all take our own journey and our own unique path in getting there.
Yeah. I have a related question for you, Robert. You may not have an answer for it, but what percentage of people do you think, so the whole world is going to have to come to Bitcoin eventually in some capacity, but what percentage of people will really wrestle with what Bitcoin means versus just adopt it because it becomes money?
Yeah, it's a great question that I don't have a good answer to, but I think we see, I guess Bitcoiners in the world today, by definition, are the early adopters, right? The first 100 million some odd people. And of that 100 million some odd people that have adopted Bitcoin, there are a small percentage that are really going down the rabbit hole, right? Either like you mentioned, Gigi, writing about it a lot, these very profound essays, or talking about it on podcasts like this. I don't know, but that alone is exciting to me, that Bitcoin can inspire that type of inquiry, that people, it's strange, isn't it? Just engaging with a new technology somehow inspires you to ask fundamental questions and lower your time preference and think more about your legacy, etc. It really calls into question how significant incentives are. Bitcoiners, we disagree about a lot of things, right? We're very disagreeable by nature. That's probably one common personality trait among Bitcoiners. But I think one thing most, if not all, Bitcoiners would agree upon is that incentives really matter, like a lot. And maybe we just haven't taken that seriously enough up until now. I mean, obviously we use proverbial carrots and sticks to try and guide human behavior, but we haven't taken things, incentives maybe seriously enough at the institutional level, right? The fact that a central bank or fiat currency exists is a testament to that. We're playing with, what is that one? There's a quote, the problem with people is we have primeval emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technologies. So it's like we're just we're playing with fire in a way, and we have to get burnt a few times before we learn how important certain things are. And I think Bitcoin is probably going to teach us that about money / incentives, that we really should have just let humans self-organize and choose the best tool for the job and not engage in all of this intervention and coercion to try and treat the market as if it's a machine, right? Pull this lever, lower interest rate, increase economy, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's not a machine, guys. You have the wrong metaphor. It's a complex adaptive system. Central bankers cannot control the economy any better than meteorologists can control the weather. So hopefully Bitcoin helps shake that tree and wake us up to that reality.
That's it. We need to dismiss the arrogance of those who believe that they can deterministically manage this thing. Bringing in the notion of kids and marriage and all that good stuff. I have a 3-year-old, and I see her absolutely learning about the world, touching the stove, falling over, hurting herself. I think we do that as a species. I guess one of the virtues of childhood is that the stakes are low in the sense that you're tiny, you don't control much, you don't have those those godlike powers. Prometheus, you don't have the Prometheus situation where you've been handed fire, although certainly kids will find the fire if you let them. So you do have to keep a lid on that in the household. But it's at the level of a complex adaptive system like the whole economy or the world. Certainly the stakes are much higher. And I personally have taken it to heart, the incentives concept, when dealing with my kids. It doesn't always work, and I try to be deliberate about it. Sometimes I get emotional about it, and my limbic system takes over, but we all do our best.
Yeah, well said. The other thing that comes up for me about fiat, it seems like it's very much fear-based. Obviously people are complying to define fiat, do this because I said so or else, right? Like do this under threat of force, basically. And that's not something that we had historically. Like we take it for granted now. If Congress signs a new bill into law, and we all have to abide by that or else, we get in trouble. But historically, it was much more like a legal discovery process, like Moses observed everyone fighting amongst themselves for a long period of time. And then finally he writes down like, okay, here's what you guys have been doing. Here are the rules. It's not like he sat down and just wrote the rules and said, follow these or else. There was a discovery process that took place. So people that are complying with fiat, do this or else, are obviously doing it out of fear. But I think also the people that are imposing or benefiting from fiat are doing it out of fear, right? The fear that if you just leave people free to their own devices, then there will be anarchy and chaos, and there won't be an economy, and there won't be any goods. It's kind of this circular logic of socialism in a way. It's people are greedy and evil, so they can't be trusted, so they need to be governed by people who are greedy and evil. It's really crazy. And I hope that by getting some fiat out of the world, by Bitcoin emerging and sort of clearing, hopefully fiat out of our money, fiat out of our legal system to some extent, that will, get rid of fear. Not entirely, of course, it's part of life, but I think a lot of people operate from a very fear-based paradigm today. And what does that Bob Marley quote, when the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace, something like that. And Bitcoin has that kind of flavor to it. So, yeah, I just hope we can help us. You're asking earlier about, will everyone go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole? Probably not, right? There's going to be just a few people. But a few people can inspire a lot of people to stop leading a fear-based life, even if they don't know why necessarily, right? Just a few courageous people setting an example, living out of love, et cetera. And I think you see that in a lot of Bitcoiners.
Right.
So I hope Bitcoin keeps pushing the world that way.
And that goes back to your point about property rights. I mean, if you're living in fear about money, it's related to, if not primarily driven by, a fear of like, is my money mine? Am I going to get more dollars? The cost of everything is rising. How am I going to pay for my family? But if you shift to a world where you have this guaranteed property right, because it's, you know, protected by math and nothing else, that shifts some of that psychology from a scarcity mindset of like, holy shit, how am I going to I need to get a raise because I need to keep up. And that's inherently fearful. From that to, oh, my savings are going to grow in value, I'm doing pretty well.
Exactly. Yeah. And that, I mean, we've all experienced it, right? The lowering of your time preference, almost equivalent to becoming a better person, right? Whatever, you know, Bitcoiners take a lot of different directions, but the commonality would be but several bad things they had about themselves pre-Bitcoin, they start to address them post-Bitcoin. Whether that's, you know, taking better physical care of yourself, going to church, drinking less, whatever it may be, saving more, even just something as simple as that. And it's strange because you wouldn't think, if Bitcoin weren't an actual thing happening, that would maybe be a difficult argument to sell. I mean, the Austrians have been making it for a long time and not a lot of people have been listening. But now we see it, you know, you see people's lives actually changing, and who knows how far that thing can go. And yeah, just the idea that your ability to own a thing is premised on other people's inability to take the thing from you. All right, it's this very simple idea, but if the incentive is there and the opportunity is there to take it, you know, states and criminals have engaged in it for a long time. So it's almost like we needed an actual incentive or technological solution to the ethical problem of letting people keep what they earn. And Bitcoin, obviously we've made advances along this front in many ways, you know, the rule of law and, you know, English common law, things like that. But Bitcoin, private property, Bitcoin's like an advancement of that idea, basically. But it's a tool plus an idea that moves us forward on that ethical continuum. So it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's got the technological element in addition with the sociological element and the philosophical and the politically scientific. Honestly, after studying this thing for a number of years, I sometimes wonder whether I could articulate it at all because it's so expansive and all-encompassing and touches everything. You know, getting back to the multidisciplinary approach with your thinking, one particular discipline is history of science, which touches on a few of these topics. I'll say I'll never forget taking a survey course in college on the history of science, and there was one professor who that was his specialty, and unfortunately, it was a terrible, terrible class. And I think it turned me off. It turned me off to the discipline, and so it was refreshing to hear your great survey that you did with Michael Saylor, which launched the What Is Money show. Have you returned to the history of science concept recently? Does it percolate in the back of your mind? Have there been any recent touch points in that regard?
You know, well, yeah, first of all, the series with Saylor was remarkable.
Agreed.
I take little to no credit for that other than just pressing record, but the guy really brought it and definitely reframed my thinking about it. You know, I've been thinking about money as time. He brought in the whole energy element, and then he tied in all this anthropology, history of technology, history of science. Obviously, he's a great storyteller. It was really enjoyable, right? Almost like
Mm-hmm.
push me further into the rabbit hole. On the history of science question, I am very fascinated by it. But I've been mostly focusing in terms of scientific literature. It's been mostly economics focused. Not entirely. Pre-Bitcoin, I really liked physics and biology. I think they're very interesting. Like the book, The River Out of Eden by Richard Dawkins, who I think I'm going to have on the show this year.
Oh, cool.
Oh, wow.
Was really impactful.
Selfish Gene got me pretty good in college.
Yeah, Selfish Gene is fantastic. There's a book called 7 Brief Lessons on Physics, I think, by Carlo Rovelli. I hope I'm saying his name right. He also has like a history of time, I think, is one of his books. So I've always had an interest there, but since Bitcoin, because I didn't have Austrian economics prior to Bitcoin, I've been mostly focused on that, and people like, Mises, Rothbard, Hoppe, just really, if you've ever read that stuff, it's hard stuff to read, but it's really
Mises
good.
is tough. Mises is dense. It's slow going. Repetition helps.
Yes. Repetition, backtracking, take it easy, take it slow. I just picked up a theory of money and credit, actually. I'm just starting that of his, but I read through Human Action twice. And one of the points he makes, I think it's in Human Action, that economics is the youngest science, basically. So we're coming out of the economic dark ages, if you will. And Bitcoin is a huge piece of that, because anywhere you have fiat currency, which is everywhere, we have this very serious intervention into the market process, right? Like, how does Safety put this? You're going backwards. You're going towards barter and away from the division of labor every time you have a central bank or a regional monopoly on money, right? You're not letting people exchange freely. So it's unwinding the global division of labor, the global civilization, frankly, raising time preference. And
economically regressive. It's economically regressive. Yeah,
exactly. And then it's interesting to think how much that plays on us psychologically, right? I think a lot of, people's day-to-day decisions are economically driven, right? Anyone that has a full-time job, I always find it funny when people that have a full-time job will say something like, I don't care about money. It's like, really? Why do you spend 40 hours out of every week doing something for money? Like, it's very serious. And, it's crazy to think that even mid 1800s, we thought that there were like particles in the universe called utils that gave things economic value. And that, this pen had 65 utils and this jug of water had 46 utils, and that's what determined their value. So we're very fresh out of this economic ignorance, I think. And so there's a lot to be learned. And I guess that's absorbing a lot of my attention, just thinking about what else are we going to figure out in economic science in the years ahead. Like, I have no idea, but it's fascinating to think about. Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Andy DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221.
Yeah, I've been lately thinking a lot about the geocentric model of the solar system and the universe, I guess, and how in science there's so many examples like that of like leeches and bloodletting, or the four humors model of medicine, and things that we look back on as like, oh, that was dumb. Of course,
right, exactly.
It just took a little bit of inquiry, a little bit of really thinking and pushing the ball forward before civilization woke up to, oh yeah, there's actually like logic and some reasonable rules that you can infer by studying something here.
Yes.
And with economics, we're still in that bloodletting leeches era.
Yes. It's excellent. I mean, the metaphor bloodletting to fiat currency inflation, or the analogy, it's very close, right? You're talking about you're draining people of their actual vitality and energy when you drain their blood. And it's the same thing you're doing when you print money, right? People have actual lifeblood, purchasing power, labor stored up in that money. And when someone else is printing it, they're basically engaging in like an economic bloodletting, right? It's very similar. And I also think it's interesting that philosopher David Hume said you can't get an ought from an is, right? So he's saying you can't take a description of reality and then make a prescription about what you should do about it. This is the domain of ethics, basically, right? We kind of decide collectively what we should do about the objective, quote unquote, objective realities we face. But when you look at something like bloodletting, there's a reason we have medical ethics, right? It's like that the is of bloodletting, it kills, or it doesn't help people, let's say, get better. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. Maybe there's some weird internet conspiracies that it does. I'm just assuming that it is actually bad for you. So we decide that the is of bloodletting is not good for humans. So the ought is, let's not do that to each other, right? Let's create a system of medical ethics and stop bloodletting, guys, to kind of advance the human enterprise. And so we need an equivalent of that in the sphere of money, right? We need monetary ethics. And that's sort of like what Bitcoin is. It's just the emergence of this money that you can't economically bloodlet, or it's much more difficult to do so, at least. And it's not enough like that we all just kind of get in a big circle and say, let's not print money anymore. We've actually tried that. I can't remember. Was it there was a law passed in Britain. This is on the Twilight of Gold series, probably in the 1600s. Where they said, this is the final money supply. We're never going to print money again. Fixed money supply. Here we go. Everyone just trade and create value. We're never printing money again. And like 6 months later, they're printing money. So like we don't have the capacity as humans to make that, to tie ourselves to that mast and not do it. So we had to invent Bitcoin to prevent ourselves from economically bloodletting one another.
The siren song is too strong.
Yes.
We just can't help ourselves. Talking about the bloodletting, I'm reminded of Semmelweis, the doctor who figured out that, I think it was microbe theory, germ theory, but specifically that it was very important that doctors wash their hands, right? And purify themselves before treating their patients.
For delivering babies.
Yes.
For example. Yeah, exactly. Before delivering babies, the next generation. And nobody believed him, right?
Oh, they attacked him.
They attacked him.
Yeah, they really said
Right.
the establishment attacked this guy. Threat. It was crazy. It's crazy, right? It's crazy. We look at that today. Like, are you kidding me?
Right. It's wild. It's wild. Yeah. And so it makes me think about this so far peaceful learning and adoption process for Bitcoin, the world's most scarce asset. I'm sure this is something you've thought about, the possible path and how this could go. It seems to be going pretty well so far, I would say. What are your thoughts about, potential reactionary forces? Does this occupy a lot of your time thinking about it, or do you just take it as it comes?
Well, yeah. So I guess the question is like, what if Bitcoin does continue to monetize and eventually become a global monetary standard? How rocky is that transition, right? Will there be retaliation by the state or what have you? I really have no idea. Like it does seem to be going really well so far, by the way. That's a great point. And my view on it is that, ultimately society is comprised of acting individuals. Again, it's one of these abstractions. We're always like, oh, what is the state going to do? But the state is comprised of a bunch of individuals, right? A bunch of individual people that are assembled into individual little power factions, and they're all competing with one another, serving their own individual self-interest. So I don't know if it's wishful thinking or not, but I just thought that, well, the cost of acquiring Bitcoin and insulating yourself or ensuring yourself against its possible success is so low, you just buy the thing. When the cost of attacking it is so high, it's like, how do you, this is a weird paradox. So Bitcoin solved the Byzantine generals problem, right? Which is, how do you propagate a message through a network of antagonistic actors in a way that the message gets through unchanged or undistorted, right? Passing a message with high fidelity through a bunch of people you can't trust, basically. We didn't know how to do that prior to Bitcoin. Now, to attack Bitcoin, the state would need to solve the Byzantine generals problem, right? You need coordination among states who are inherently distrustful of one another to really take a good shot at Bitcoin, right? You would need China and Russia and United States, et cetera, to collaborate and really squash it. But as that collaboration, if that were to come together, the incentives to defect from that would get higher, right? If you did get that collaboration going on, all of a sudden China's like, well, if we just support it and mine it, then we could undercut all of these guys and make a ton of money, blah, blah, blah. So I've long thought that Bitcoin, it's so asymmetrically advantageous for the individual that it was just going to dissolve centralized power structures over time, that individual group people and then individual groups would just hold this thing, even if they hate it, right? That a central bank, like, we hate this thing, but we need to put 1% of our assets in it in case it succeeds, because if it succeeds, it's an existential threat for our entire business. And so central bank A does that. They put 1% in. Well, central bank B, C, and D say, oh, well, central bank A did that. We now need to put 1% in. And every time you put 1% in, and I'm picking on central banks here, pick your large capital holder. It doesn't matter what institution it is. Every time someone puts purchasing power into this thing or buys some of it, they're actually increasing its odds for success. So the game theory just kind of ratchets up, right? Each time someone puts it in, you're like, well, now I need to evaluate the probability of its success a little bit higher, and therefore put a little bit more of my assets to protect myself. And then the sequence goes on and on and on. And you get hyper Bitcoinization. So I hope that's what happens. Might be wishful thinking. If you talk to someone like Eric Kaysen, he thinks we're all going to the gulags.
Right.
So who knows?
It's useful to have
overarching thought. Sorry, just to finish, is like optionality. So Bitcoin's obviously a great form of optionality, but if you're concerned about the state level risk, diversify, right? Get other passports, get other residencies, etc., and have backup plans.
Yeah, that's great advice. Really well said. I agree with you. I think that one of my favorite things about Bitcoin is the bigger and bigger or higher and higher levels that it achieves, and the larger and larger the capital bases, as you just mentioned. So for every, first it's a few cypherpunks playing around with it. Then it's, some parties that can't transact otherwise that really need it. And there's these larger and larger pools of capital. And as you said, we're at the central bank stage, or maybe the sovereign government stage. And I love that there are certain large participants that can't even touch it until it gets big enough, right, for them to dip their toe. So there's always a bigger and bigger buyer, a bigger and bigger pool of capital. And feels like that's where we're finding ourselves these days at, a $1 trillion plus market cap of Bitcoin. And there's still such tremendous upside to look forward to.
It's well said. And the other component to that that's really important is that the more purchasing power that is stored in Bitcoin, not only the more likely it is to succeed. Well, the more likely it is to succeed because it's harder to stop, right? The network becomes more secure as it grows. So you get this safe that becomes harder to crack the more treasure you have in it, basically. And that's crazy to think about. So I don't, anyone that's running that calculus honestly will just buy it. It's like, what are you going to do to try to attack it? I don't know. So yeah, I think that's the way it will go. And then you just get states then are incentivized to deal with their citizens more honestly, right? Because people will be able to move their capital more easily. States will have to explicitly tax people rather than print money. So it'll be less of this surreptitious tax and more of this explicit tax. And that people resist that, right? When they see the bill, I always love citing the war on terror as an example. This was between 2001 and 2019, I think, pre-COVID. The U.S. printed $2.8 trillion, and we spent $2.5 trillion on the war on terror, which came out to something like $80,000 per U.S. household. I might be off somewhere on these numbers slightly, but it's in the ballpark. Right. If they didn't have the money printer and they sent each U.S. household an $80,000 bill, how long do you think the war on terror would have lasted? I don't think it would have made it as far as it has. So, which obviously gets into Bitcoin's whole value proposition as a peacemaking technology. It's like, just stop, guys. Just stop blowing each other up. Stealing from people through money printing to go and blow up other people and take their stuff. It's just, we can't call ourselves rational or civilized animals until we stop these mass murder campaigns funded through money printing. And hopefully Bitcoin helps with that.
Amen. One of my favorite stats about, I can't remember, I think it was Afghanistan. It was either Afghanistan or Iraq, was the pallets of cash that were literally lost in transit, right? They can't account for them. It was like a couple $1 billion worth, which ironically accounts for a very small percentage of the expenditure on those war efforts, as you said, trillions of dollars. But literally at that scale, you just physically lose money. Where does the money go? Who knows?
Yeah, it's such a scam. And it's a bit ironic that, I guess, I don't know, most of the world maybe thinks Bitcoin's a scam still. I don't think that would be too much of a stretch to say.
No,
Probably more than half. Yet it's the only money that's absolutely not a scam. I mean, I guess you could say physical gold, but it's just not practical for everyone to deal with physical gold. So that tipping point's coming, right? There's going to be a tipping point where more than half the world knows that Bitcoin is the only non-scam money. And that will be an interesting day.
So speaking of the scam and my personal view is that perhaps the single biggest reason that people view it that way still is the volatility in the, in the price or the purchasing power. I wonder, do you have any thoughts on that in general? I mean, the three of us are probably comfortable with the fact that that's a shorter term phenomenon and the volatility in purchasing power has been reducing over time. But what thoughts do you have for people on getting comfortable with that reality and how it's likely to play out?
It's an excellent question. And it's so if you don't think about what money is, then you don't realize that there's like a software integration into your mind, right? You're thinking about the world through dollars or in terms of dollars, right? And this is what people get so focused on the Bitcoin dollar price, the Bitcoin price expressed in dollars, because, well, that's the global reserve currency. But if you don't think about it critically, you'll fail to see that, well, anything can be priced in terms of anything, right? Money is just kind of the convenient, common language we use, but you can really think about anything in terms of anything else. And that's what purchasing power is, right? You're flipping the ratio. Instead of saying, oh, that steak is $32, you're saying, well, how much steak does my unit of money buy me, basically? And so...
a lot less than it used to, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, it is basically tripled in price since the pandemic started.
The pandemic. I haven't heard that before.
As a frequent beef eater, I keep a close eye on the beef price. So there's that, just the whole denominator issue that people don't understand. You can denominate anything and anything. But then, I guess the other piece is it is market capitalization and volatility are inversely correlated, right? So the bigger and more liquid an asset, the less volatility it's going to have in terms of both either price or purchasing power. It's not a deterministic law, but it's just what it tends to look like. And so, that's just not easy to communicate to people. Like I've analogized, you could look at something like the Amazon stock, right? That I think Amazon crashed 94% in the .com bubble. And then it grew, 60,000% since, or whatever it is now. And what are the daily moves on an Amazon now, right? It's not 94%, right? It's become much less volatile as it's grown larger. And Bitcoin, as you said, is following a similar trajectory. But how do you explain that to people? Man, it's hard. It's really hard. This is why I have 400 something episodes on what is money. Like it's a tricky topic. And
we do our best.
Comfortable with it? Yeah, I don't know. To get comfortable with it, I don't know. I mean, I guess you just have to get some skin in the game. Treat it like long-term savings, dollar cost average, long-term accumulation. If you're sensitive to the price, then you probably own too much of it, right? You really shouldn't care about it that much, right? If you really intend to treat it like savings, the way savings is intended to be, well, savings is intended to be saved and only used in case of emergency sort of thing, or to build your dreams or something like that. But the more you're treating Bitcoin like checking, I think the more you're going to get shocked by the volatility. But the more you treat it like savings, the more you're buffered from that shock. So I hope that's helpful for people.
Yeah, that's it. I know you've got some thoughts on that. You've been communicating that, Jesse, to friends, colleagues, clients, family for a long time. How do you get them comfortable with the vol?
Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys. And with this, you can get started at swan.com/Breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE.
Yeah, I mean, Robert's right. It's kind of impossible. It's an impossible question, but it's a journey that everybody has to go through. And I think going back to what Robert was saying of, the vast majority of people think that Bitcoin is the scam, but once you go through the looking glass, then you have a totally different perspective, and then you appreciate Bitcoin for what it is, and you realize that Bitcoin is the one thing that is not a scam. And everything on the other side of the looking glass, that was the scam. And so I think that, you guys have probably experienced this too, that the people in my life that I have managed, the few people in my life that I have managed to bring into Bitcoin had to just take that leap, had to dip a toe and then learn more and then increase their allocation until they got comfortable with Bitcoin on its own terms. And that's just an uncomfortable and hard process. And that's part of me wondering how many people will do that. But the other reality is, if people choose not to make that leap, Bitcoin will make the leap for them. Bitcoin is going to keep encroaching on all territory until, pretty soon everybody's 401k is going to include Bitcoin because they have MicroStrategy in the S&P. And so it grows.
That's it. Well, let's continue to look to the future a little bit. Robert, as you think about allocating your time, which you understand better than anyone is the truly scarce resource, do you imagine spending more of your time thinking about policy issues, or is that not so much of interest to you? Do you prefer the fundamentals to the layer, to the human layer, to the very flawed human layer with all its busted incentives?
Yeah, if I could respond to something Jesse said, then I will answer that question. This is the thing about studying money, like you're looking at the looking glass. John Vervaeke actually has this great example where he's talking about human rationality. It's like whatever frame of reference you're using, it's almost implied, and you take it for granted. And he uses glasses, like eyeglasses, as an example. It's like you're looking through the lens and you're seeing the image as it appears to you through that lens. But how often do you take off the glasses and examine the actual glasses, right? The frame of reference is implied. And this is the thing about studying money, is like you have to do that metacognitive leap. It's like, wait, whoa, what am I thinking through that is causing my thoughts to be distorted in a certain way? And that's the whole unplug the dollar, plug in the sats thing. And I agree. Like you can't, I don't know. It's one of those things you can't just read in a book and get it. You almost have to have some Bitcoin, basically. And I think everyone has some amount of money they can put into Bitcoin, like whatever it is. I don't know, whatever amount of money you can stand to literally lose, right? It could be $1, whatever. But where your money goes, your mind will follow. Like once you have some of it, you'll just start paying more attention. You'll probably start listening to podcasts. Maybe you'll read a book. And you should probably do that. I don't like the word should, but I will say it here. Because again, and we're talking about, again, $1 or whatever the amount of money you can totally stand to lose is. Because if you don't start learning about it, it's like you either take the orange pill or the orange suppository, as someone said, right? You can take it voluntarily now or involuntarily later. And I don't know. I think it's the most important question of our time, right? Like what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is money. Well, what is money? You better start figuring it out. Otherwise, you're going to be figuring it out under duress soon. So on the question of policy issues, it bores me, frankly. It bores me.
Speaking of suppositories, not a topic of interest for you.
It's just, I don't know. I went on a few of these podcasts where, people can be it seems to me like a lot of people really love being political, right? They love, and this is part of the state's game, by the way, right? That you can rotate in this politician, put Biden in there, and everyone's directing all that animosity at him. And then you just pull out that puppet, put in another one 8 years later, and they direct all the animosity at him. But it's like you never get any systemic change because everyone's animosity is pointed at an individual. And it's like, has anyone ever thought that maybe, one ape to rule 330 million apes is just bad math? Like this just systemically doesn't work. You can be mad at Trump or mad at Biden or mad at whoever, but it's just never going to work, frankly. So that's where politics in the fiat world we're currently in really bores me. Now back to DC Schindler, I am reading some of his book now about the traditional sense of politics, right? As like the distributed ethics, like if the marketplace is distributed cognition, politics is supposed to be like distributed ethics. Like we were saying, like how do we ethically orient ourselves towards the good collectively? There's a lot of dangerous socialist words in here, as you may have noticed. But that's intriguing to me, but I don't know much about it. I'm just learning. But the idea of like going to Washington or like trying to campaign for money and go fight that Leviathan in the belly just sounds horrible to me. Much more interested in being a student and being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, that's probably time better spent for you. So on the entrepreneurial front, is there anything that is of interest that you want to talk about with us today?
Well, the show is my main focus, and I may have some other interests coming up, but the show has been really my main focus the past 3 years, and there's a lot to it. Actually, it doesn't. I mean, well, you guys know. Setting up a studio here. I just moved to Miami, so I'm setting up a studio here in my home. So I'm trying to do a lot more interviews in person. And there's just a lot of moving pieces. So I hope to get that really dialed in. And then maybe I'll have more to say on the entrepreneurial front after that.
Well, as a fan of the show, I can attest that it shows in terms of the input to the output. It's definitely on the must listen category, and people should understand. I mean, obviously, it's like with buying Bitcoin. Like, just go try it if you haven't already. Although I suspect a large percentage of our audience will already be involved, but it does touch so many aspects. It's much broader, I would say, than almost any other Bitcoin related show out there. So
thank you.
Highly recommend. Well, you've been very generous with your time, Robert. Want to give you an opportunity though to touch on any topics that we haven't covered up to this point, including in addition to the What is Money show, where else can people learn more about your thoughts and find you?
Sure. Well, I had a little thing I wanted to say about scarcity since this is the title of your guys' podcast.
Please do.
Let's do it.
So, what do we think here? Most people, I guess, when you use that word scarcity, I think most people think that it's just a supply thing, right? Like there's just not enough of the thing, which is sort of true in a sense, but in a strict economic sense, scarcity is not purely a function of supply, right? It's wherever demand exceeds supply. And so it's also not necessarily related to value or significance, because if you're talking about something like oxygen, right, that's very important, very essential to human life, but it's so super abundant that the supply exceeds the demand, we don't have a price for it, right? We don't have to ration it. The supply so far out exceeds the demand, it's not scarce. Whereas something unessential like the Mona Lisa painting, right, can have an extremely high price because, well, there's only one, but there's a lot of demand. So I think that's just I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but it seems like most people think it's just a supply thing, but it's not. It's supply and demand. And then we often, and Andy, you and I have talked about this a lot. In your book, I think you have 14 properties of money. Was that right?
That's it. I wish there were fewer. I wish there were less of them.
Well, I narrow it down to 5, right, to try and make it. And I'm lifting this from Gary North. And one of them, is divisibility, durability, recognizability, portability, and the last one's scarcity. So you might ask yourself, like, what? Why? If scarcity is, and by the way, I should have said this earlier, scarcity is the starting point of all economics, right? It's the point of all economics. Let's collaborate so that we can create more supply per unit of effort to satisfy all that demand. Anywhere demand exceeds supply and the thing is scarce, right? So we're creating more stuff, more solutions to problems, whether this be goods, services, etc. So you might think, well, if scarcity is what we're trying to overcome in economics, why is scarcity a good property of money? It's almost like a counterintuitive thing. And maybe it's a bad word. So like a lot of people have argued that. Like it's just a bad word. It's confusing people. You could go with something like supply integrity or predictability, perhaps. But the way I like to think about it is, and Safety goes into this in his book, right? Like ultimately, and you said this earlier, it's all a function of human time, ultimately. That's the only thing that's actually practically scarce. Like if we point enough human time at anything, we can get more of the thing, right? To satisfy maybe not all the demand, but a lot of it. And so really it's our time that's scarce. And so if money is this, and obviously all goods and services require time to produce, so therefore goods and services are scarce by extension. So if money is this tool we use to acquire goods and services, and goods and services are scarce, you might be able, if you follow that line of reasoning, you might be able to intuitively grasp why non-scarce money would be a problem. Because you have the money that represents something that is scarce, but if it itself is not scarce and someone can just artificially expand the supply, then they can use that to steal the actually scarce stuff from the people that can't print the money. So it's kind of maybe it's confusing people more. You could just dispense with this whole argument if it is, but for me, it was kind of intuitive in a way. It's like, and Jeff Booth sums this up, right? If you have scarce money, you have abundant goods. If you have abundant money, you have scarce goods, basically. We need something that represents the scarcity of human time. That's, if you consider money to be a tool for trading human time, you need something that reflects that scarcity. And this is why Bitcoin is so perfect. I mean, I think I'll use that word, perfect, right? It's absolutely scarce, right? It has a perfectly fixed supply, just like your lifetime, just like the human time that money is intended to be an emblem for. And so, Scarce Assets podcast, good name. Might be scary for some people, but scarcity is a very important topic. And if you get your cognitive grip on that, I think you'll get a cognitive grip on at least to some extent on Bitcoin. And hopefully that's really useful in your life and in your family's life and your future family's life, etc.
Well, I love that insight, Robert. Sorry, go ahead. I cut you off, Jesse.
No, that was it. That's my spiel on scarcity. I wanted to bring that one to your guys' show.
It's perfect. You encapsulated it. It's exactly, that's the whole story. The whole story of Bitcoin is that, for all of our lives, we've had a form of money that is incompatible with what it represents.
Bingo.
And now Bitcoin is like to like with what it is intended to value, which is our time ultimately. And, and that kind of ties it back to through the looking glass analogy of like, everybody's been living in bizarro world thinking that infinite Ponzi units are a fair representation, a fair measuring stick for how we value our finite time. And now you go through the looking glass and you have a different perspective that is more in tune with, the alignment of those two things.
It's very well said. And here, welcome to the Bitcoin rabbit hole, right? It is radical, and you could, in many ways, I think Bitcoin is basically the invention of money, right? Or at least the invention of pure money. We've never had anything that's 100% monetary premium. It has no other use case, right?
Yeah.
Gold has other uses. Everything has other uses, but
the invention of the number zero, the invention of money, it's the same thing.
Exactly. So it's a singular idiosyncratic event, right? It's never going to happen again. It's non-repeatable. And all this sounds ridiculous, maybe at first blush, but I don't know. Welcome to the rabbit hole. Come disprove it.
That's it. Well, Robert, I really want to thank you for sharing or spending some of your scarce time with us. It's been a pleasure falling down the rabbit hole, learning from you, with you, and from you about Bitcoin over these many years. I hope we have a chance to do it again with you. And on behalf of our audience, this has been Scarce Assets.
Thanks, guys.